Hey everyone, it's Friday and I'll probably need this to run. You are here at Litvak Leadership Live and I'm here with my good friend, Robert Adolph, Bruce Adolph. He is an internet commentator, veteran. Thank you for your service, Robert. You've done so much for our country. Robert is a former U.S. Army Special Services Lieutenant Colonel and UN Chief Security Advisor. And that would take up most of the show. I invite you to go to LinkedIn to read all of Robert's credentials, but who's and understands leadership is an understatement. Robert, welcome to the show again.
Thank you very much, Sean. A pleasure to be here.
We were having some internet issues earlier. There we go. Are you there?
I am.
Okay, good. They are going to talk about this article, the leadership styles you can use from IMD, it's a very interesting article. I was very intrigued by it and thought it would be great to get Robert's perspective. So their leadership styles that they talk about, the authoritarian, the participative, transactional, and transformational. Let's jump right into it with the authoritarian leader is what it used to be. Robert, what do you think about the authoritarian leader? What was it like, and how does that work in the future?
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You were cutting out a little bit there. Yes, but we're still cutting out a bit. Okay, I'll give it a shot. The authoritarian leaders are probably the most common. We see it over and over and over again, particularly in literature and in the movies, for example. The authoritarian leader is well known. The Hitlers, the fascists, the Mussolinis. Okay, these are highly authoritative leaders. Essentially, they are sociopathic narcissists, the overwhelming majority of them. And what we discovered over the many years of studying leadership is that authoritarian leaders, generally speaking, almost always, in the end, fail. And they fail in large measure because they're all about their image instead of the substance that's necessary. So, for example, Hitler and Mussolini spent a lot of time burnishing their image. An image is only a pale reflection of who we are and who you are. And eventually, everyone came, or nearly everyone, came to see through the lie. So eventually, authoritarian leaders fail.
So, most business or even the military and leadership, I mean, I remember many of the supervisors that I had over time, they said that really wasn't a need for discussion, but that doesn't work anymore. But without that authoritarianness or that, how do great outcomes occur in people period of opinions?
Wartime is the perfect example. We look at somebody like General Patton, who was highly authoritative. So it appeared that was his image. However, among his staff, he listened to his staff. He had to have, if you will, all 5 of the styles of leadership at different times he would have used. I've read 2 or 3 biographies of Patton. He's not the cardboard cutout that folks in the movies might have wanted to see. Sometimes he was an authoritarian. Sometimes he was participative. Sometimes he had to delegate to subordinates. Sometimes he had to be transactional. And when he was at his finest, he was a transformational leader, which is both rare and valuable. It means that the team, his team, will accomplish tasks even when the leader is absent. The most prominent example was when he had to leave in the Battle of the Bulge. He actually left his command to have a meeting with senior generals and left a subordinate in charge, but left them instructions on how to generally proceed. They planned the Battle of the Bulge, meaning that the attack of the Americans tore on the axis of Bastogne. They did that in large measure without him.
And how were they able to accomplish that?
Because they knew their commander's intent. Patton was an authoritarian, no doubt about it, but he was also participative. He trusted his G2, Oscar Koch. He trusted his G3. He trusted his operations officer. He trusted in the people that were on his staff to perform those tasks that needed to be done. So essentially, Patton was able at several different levels to gain the respect of his team and their loyalty. And because he had their respect and their loyalty, he was able to gain their trust. And because he respected them in turn, they were able to comply with his intent. And he was able to delegate much of the war fighting. And I got to tell you, generals don't fight wars. Captains do, sergeants do.
Right.
Sometimes, and every once in a while, a colonel does. But the fact is, the wars are fought below the level of colonel.
Interesting. So, how did he pivot from authoritarian, giving that authority to his subordinates and knowing that they would come through for him?
Well, unlike what goes on now, in large measure, staffs used to travel with their generals. So, for example, when Patton was moved from command of troops in North Africa and Sicily and used as a decoy for the Germans, he brought his entire staff with him. His staff stayed with him all the time. And the reason why was it was thought that, and there was a lot of support for this kind of thinking back then, that the staff got to know their general. The general got to know his staff. And on that respect, that loyalty engendered trust and allowed, how can I say this? Allowed for better war fighting. There's probably a better way to say that, but
allowed better what?
Better war fighting. Nowadays, what happens in large measure is we'll take a general without a staff and put him in charge of a division, in command of a division, in command of a corps, in command of an army. But in large measure, he'll not travel with his staff. And essentially what we've tried to do in the U.S. military is to create a circumstance whereby one size fits all. So you can take a general from command of one army, put him in command of another army, and it will still function.
So how does that then be participative leadership style, where everyone is talking about what's ruled by committee?
Well, number one, leadership by committee is horrid. Eventually, you have to make a decision. And it's useful to have a
Leadership
committee.
that committee is horrible.
Yes, you have to have. Okay, let me back up a little bit. Authoritarianism is useful when it's time dependent. If you have to make a decision right now, if something is happening in real time and you have to make a call right now, authoritarianism is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. You go ahead and make the call. If time allows, you absolutely, positively want to be participative. And the reason why is because none of us is perfect. Even those of us that have IQs above north of 160 still have much to learn from others. So if, for example, you can get your staff, you've got the time, you get your staff together to discuss these matters and make sure that you're covering all the bases. When you get 12 minds working on a problem, absolutely you're going to get a better result than if one person's mind is working on it. So participation is absolutely essential across the board.
Having all the people involved make sure you don't miss anything.
Yes, absolutely. And you can't think of anything. No matter how brilliant you think you are, you can't cover all the bases. We all need the help and support of our teams. And forgetting that is toxic.
Yeah, I in a vacuum is leading oneself into failure and those around you.
Absolutely. Now that brings us to the issue of delegation. You can delegate easily to those on your team in which you have trust. Now, it usually takes time to build that bridge of trust between a senior and a subordinate. So delegation takes place when you first built the bridge of trust. And how do you build the bridge of trust? There are precursors. There are things that need to take place, human things that need to take place prior in order to build that bridge. And we're talking about essentially two elements, what are called the two C's, competence and caring. First, you must know your job. And if you know your job, if you understand your job, and if you know it better than anybody else, on that is built respect. And if you're caring of your team, if you take time with them, if you help them through rough spots, if you are empathetic to their needs, wants, whether or not to promote those people that deserve promotion, that's not necessarily transactional. And we'll talk about transactional in a minute. But transactional leadership, I wouldn't even call leadership. I would not put it in a leadership style. It is management style. And I detest managers. It's the bane of the HR system.
So the thing that I've seen about, the challenge that I've seen with the wrong leader, they delegate, forget. Well, they hold them accountable, but they don't hold themselves accountable, because although you're delegating the work to be done or delegate, you are still ultimately responsible. And now you have the added responsibility of ensuring that the individual, but too often I've seen people just blame people. Blame game starts.
Yes. First and foremost, the senior leader, and like I said, I make a broad line of demarcation between leaders and managers. So we're talking about leadership in this case. The senior leader is responsible for everything his or her team does or fails to do. You have to take full responsibility. Full stop. There's no other way around it. If you want to be a great leader, you have to do that. If you don't, you're mediocre, and you're guaranteed mediocre results in the end. You may achieve something at the beginning, but in the end, you will fail. Now, delegation, as I mentioned earlier, talks to trust. And that leads us to the conversation about transactional. And this I think should be brief. Transactional leadership isn't leadership at all. It has nothing in common with actual leadership. If it's transactional, it's what many managers do. I am paying you a wage. You're here for me, working from 8 to 5, for example, or longer. Okay. And you will do what I say so long as I'm paying you this. That's even poor management.
Yeah,
but that's what passes for leadership for many people. And they're wrong. It's all wrong. And it's wrong all day. And it's destructive and it's toxic. And it leads people to hate their jobs. Everybody, and I mean everybody, wants to feel good about their position in life, their job, whatever that job is. You want to feel like you're making a contribution. You wish to get up in the morning, have your cup of coffee, and look forward to going to work. I've gone to jobs before where it was misery because my leadership, my manager, was, how can I say this kindly, a no good sludge sucking son of a bitch. Someone who was not worthy of loyalty, respect, or my trust.
Got it. And and you could take that whole transactional leadership thing and even apply it to different careers. That if behaving and working in a transactional way, it just seems very stiff. There was somehow that I would ask them a question and they would, go on and answer it. And then they'd finish and they'd kind of look at me like, okay, your turn. Very transactional. It wasn't back and forth engagement.
Yes. In other words, you're not making a human connection at all. Now, this is common amongst sociopathic narcissists. And the fact is, there is a significant percentage of individuals in the population who suffer from various degrees of sociopathy. I'm not talking about psychopaths and serial killers, not that. But people who simply have enormous difficulty actually or lacking empathy. The key element here is empathy. If you lack empathy, you are incapable forever and evermore of ever being a high quality leader. It is denied to you because you lack an essential human quality. And first and foremost, and this is what almost everyone forgets, first and foremost, in order to be a high quality leader, in order to be a great leader, you must first and foremost be a good person. If you miss this essential mandatory requirement.
But how does one define a good person?
You have to have some moral standing. Now, morality is dependent in large measure on culture. So within our culture, we can generally define morality. You know automatically what's moral and what isn't. There may be some confusion at the edges, at the fringes, but the bottom line is you know what's moral and what isn't. And also there must be some understanding of ethics. Go ahead.
So I was going to say, dare I ask you, structure such as it is today, when we start talking about morality, and you and I had an earlier conversation. The Democrats and the Republicans, I think, both operate in their own sphere of morality, are the moral ones, and they couldn't be more opposed in so many areas.
That's a very, very large discussion. And I've written and published several articles on that subject. I'm not sure we want to open that. I'm not sure we want to open that can of worms.
Yeah. I guess the point that I'm making is you're kind of saying we have a common morality. And I'm throwing out there that I think we have two common moralities right now in our country. Subscribe to one or the other.
I think that the morality actually is the same. What we're talking about is a worldview or viewpoint. I think if you took, in large measure, a Republican and a Democrat, okay, they in large measure would agree on what is moral and what is ethical behavior. What we're talking about is a difference in worldview, or in this case, domestic view. There are differences in belief systems. However, in large measure, the morality remains the same. We know we shouldn't go out and shoot somebody. We know that. We know we shouldn't engage in fraudulent behavior. There are things we know we shouldn't do. And in large measure, we agree on that.
Now that I can agree with. There's just here where some people say it's very moral and other people say it is immoral. I don't think anyone is saying that it is a good standard to grab onto. And should that end up becoming something that more concerned than I am for society at large already?
Yeah, I understand. And like I said, I didn't want to open that can of worms, not here. But in general, okay, I think we have an agreed to morality. We might differ on whether we believe that the ends desired are justified by the means used. So there are several points of departure, of honest disagreement between those from the political right and the political left. I am a lifelong political conservative, but many of the articles I've written recently have been highly critical of the Republican Party. I'm still a conservative. However, I am still highly critical of the Republican Party and many of its representatives and what they're doing. Because for me, they've taken a departure from the truth. And when you depart from the truth, I'm sorry, morality stops having any meaning.
Yeah, and you and I have had this conversation more appropriately stated, the conservatives and the liberals as opposed to because frankly, I define myself as a conservative and I happen to be a Republican because I identify with the Democrats because they are too far to the left of where I am.
Yeah, all that's fine.
In our political system at this point. Okay.
I think in terms of political leadership, we're talking about.
Go ahead.
In political leadership is about bringing everybody who shares your common values and bringing those values to the fore, and then talking about, because governance at the end of the day is a practical art form. It's about the art of the possible. Those things we think we can actually hope to accomplish. So, for example, what we're looking at now with the Biden administration and what he's attempting to do through largely the Democratic legislature, trying to put a significant amount of money into infrastructure that's badly needed. There's no doubt that many of the Republicans agree with Democrats that we have crumbling infrastructure in America and that it's needed. And we absolutely have to do something about this. You can disagree on timing. You can disagree on how much money needs to be spent. You can disagree about how it should be done or where the priorities should be. But I don't think anybody disagrees that we don't need to do a better job at maintaining and creating new infrastructure in the interest of the whole country. That's all parties concerned. That's all Americans on the political left and the right.
Yeah, and I get the question of what's in the bill and is it really for what it says it's for, and how much pork is there?
I don't know of any bills
So
that
it
go
would be
through
so
Congress.
easy to do what they say the title of the bill is and not have all this other stuff attached to it.
I understand. Okay, but I don't know any bills that are going through Congress these days that don't have pork assigned. And pork is not necessarily a full-time preoccupation of the political left. It's also, in my experience, a full-time preoccupation of the political right as well, because each and every one of these representatives within both the Senate and the House of Representatives have constituencies. So they're looking out for the best interest of their constituencies. What does every first-term congressman or senator want most? They want a second term, and perhaps a third term, and sometimes a fourth and more.
You want to be reelected.
Keep your constituency happy.
Absolutely. It's the thing, and they've all become very, very transactional. Be with one another, working in democratic theory, and be working in participative leadership. The independents, shouldn't they be working together, participating to do things for the good of, as opposed to just trying to lift themselves up?
You would hope that that would be the case. But the fact is, as I mentioned earlier, there's a significant proportion of Americans who are suffering from different levels of sociopathy, a lack of empathy. There may be some who are largely ego-driven. Hitler was ego-driven. Mussolini was ego-driven. Franco in Spain was ego-driven. These are the most egregious examples, but there are several examples well beneath that threshold that apply. So one of the first things I look for in good leaders is some degree of empathy. Now, it's difficult when you're talking about political leadership to figure out who's actually empathic and who's burnishing their image. And there can be all kinds of disagreements about that. And I understand that level of disagreement. However, no one would disagree that empathy is a requirement of a senior leader. And also recognize that there's a massive difference between leadership at, say, lower levels and higher levels. And most folks don't actually understand the transition that's necessary for someone going from, say, junior leadership to senior leadership. If you continue to apply the lessons that you learned when you were a lieutenant and you're now commanding a battalion, you will fail. It's a different kind of leadership. And if colonels, who later become generals, try and run their divisions and corps in the same way they ran their battalions, it will fail. The lessons you learned, you have to relearn as you go up. So presidents of the United States, for example, are not in the business of managing so much as expressing a vision, a clear, understandable, comprehensible vision, and then hiring those individuals, like-minded individuals, you would hope. In some cases, in the case of Lincoln, he hired many of his adversaries to come on board in his administration. And that actually worked during the American Civil War. And he was a sufficiently capable leader to be able to manage those egos. He did so successfully.
And how did he do that so successfully?
Because he was able to take his ego and stick it in his pocket. That's one of my sayings. It's one of the things I told my teams take your ego and stick it in your pocket. That was one of the things I had difficulty doing when I was young. I was very much ego driven. I want to make a statement here and make it very, very clear that whatever I think I might know, understand, or comprehend about leadership was not because I did everything right. I didn't. I made tons of errors. I made a multitude of mistakes. However, I did come over time to recognize those errors and recognize those mistakes and didn't make the same mistakes twice. So, if you will, whatever I think I know about leadership, and all of our conversations is partially about those things that I've read, partially about those things I've written and largely about the mistakes I've made in my life in leadership positions. It's the mistakes that ultimately, well, at least in my case, defined me, and hopefully I learned something from it.
So, I'm a transformational leader is just what you're describing now. Someone that can embrace their mistakes and actually not get aggravated by their mistakes in front of their team, showing some of their humanity, communicating to their team that it's okay to make errors, but you still need to be striving for excellence. Would you say that?
I would. I would agree with every word of that. I started out by saying it's critically important to accept that your leadership style must adapt to the people you lead and the circumstances present. Anybody who considers themselves a good leader must be adaptive to the circumstances that they find in front of them. In other words, if you apply the same leadership principles or the same leadership style in every single circumstance, once again, eventually you're going to fail. You must be adaptive. And this is why leadership is one of the many reasons why leadership is so damn important and so damn difficult. We do not all share the same values. So I would add a sixth style, which might be called adaptive leadership. All the styles mentioned above may come into play at various times, but there are some essentials which are simpler and easier to remember in my estimation. I mentioned it before. First, you got to be a good person, both morally and ethically bound. This is not optional. In my estimation, it's mandatory. Hitler was not ethical. Mussolini was not moral. Franco was neither. The bottom line is that you first must have some basis in morality and some understanding of ethical behavior. And you must understand that the phrase, your subordinates, your staff, must be revisualized as our team. It's not, being a great leader is not about you. And if you make it about you, you'll once again eventually fail. So your subordinates have to become our team. If not, you are incapable of being a great leader or even a good one. You must possess the personal quality of empathy. When someone's hurting, if someone has just lost a child, if their mother is sick at home, and you are uncaring and unfeeling about that, people are going to pick up on that. They're going to notice. They're going to notice that what you care about is the bottom line and not them. And if you don't care about your people, there's no reason at all why they should care about you. So, without empathy, otherwise known as compassion, no amount of training or experience will turn you into a great leader or even a good one. Another word which is often used is caring. You have to care for your people. So, caring and competency. Now, the two C's are an aide memoir. The two C's, competence and caring. Upon competence is built respect. So, caring builds loyalty, competence builds respect, and if you have the loyalty and respect of your team, I'm here to tell you, they will not permit you to fail. They will not permit you to fail.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, caring and competency, I totally over the years, not experiencing compassion, it and be empathetic with teammates, because it did career where I had shown compassion to people, I had been empathetic to them, and it was just a bunch of hooey for them to get out of. It's been a stumbling block for me over the years, because I don't want to, there, life happens, but the flip side of life happening is you can't let life get in the way.
There's something else too. When I talk about
And I
leadership
think
being
in the way when they don't
Mhm.
necessarily need to, and save it for when life happens.
But you have to remember that, as I mentioned earlier, not everyone shares the same values that perhaps you and I do. And you have to take that into consideration as well.
Yeah.
And if you have a group of people that don't share your values, the perfect example was the nearly 20 years I spent in the United Nations, serving side by side with colleagues from nearly 200 different countries, representing multiple different cultures and tribal systems. Trust me, their values were not my values. How do you conduct leadership in a milieu such as that, when the people that you're with all day, every day, don't necessarily believe the same things you believe? That's the greatest challenge of all. And transformational leadership in that context is extraordinarily difficult. I learned a great deal about leadership in the United States Army over 26 years. I learned more about leadership trying to apply those leadership principles I learned in the Army in the United Nations, but in large measure based on a better understanding of human nature. First, understanding the people that you're with, understanding who you can trust. That degree of sociopathy I was talking to you about previously impacts more than just leaders. It impacts subordinates too. So you may find some sociopaths on your team. Now, are they worthy of your time and attention and empathy? That's a decision you have to make at the time in the best interest of whatever your mission happens to be. So to become a truly transformational leader,
Absolutely.
you may have to come to threaten those that are purely transactional or sociopathic. You may have to fire some people. There are people that need to be fired. You go to any group. Okay, I saw this on a presentation recently. I forget the guy's name, but the first question he asked when he got where he was going was, "Who's the asshole here?" There's always an asshole in a group. Whatever group you happen to be part of, okay, there's always someone that stands out that nobody likes because they're too much about themselves. They're dicks. So if you have a dick, if you have an asshole on your team, it may be you can try working with that individual, try to improve their behavior, sensitize them to the impacts they're having on the rest of the team. And if that doesn't work, you may have to cut the cord and get rid of them. Recognize that firing some people may be necessary in order to serve mission accomplishment, whatever that mission happens to be. Hitler in Nazi Germany was an expert manipulator. He was a bunco artist. He was a con man, okay? And these con men exist both in leadership ranks, and amongst those who are followers as well. It would be a good idea to weed them out. Now, great leaders may have healthy egos, but will avoid becoming slaves to it. So as I mentioned previously, I always told the people that I worked with, take your ego, stick it in your pocket. It's not useful in this context, okay? If you're going to go around wounded all the time, or if you're going to go around and engaging in bravado behavior, okay, neither is useful to the team. Neither helps us get our job done. And this brings me to one of the last points I wanted to make, is the massive benefit of self-awareness. It's found in the ability to remove oneself from a complex human equation to better understand the key issues. It means taking yourself out of the equation. A lot of people
is that they don't have self-awareness.
A lot of people can't do that, but the best leaders always can. So quickly, what have we learned? First, great leaders must be good people. You don't need a signpost to point out the good people to you in any organization. They become even if they're not in leadership positions. They become moral leaders in the group because everybody listens to them. And moral leadership can be a hell of a lot more important than institutional leadership. Those people who are appointed to lead us and may or may not be quality leaders themselves. They must possess the quality of empathy, otherwise known as compassion or caring. If so, that's the base of the pyramid. If you have that, you can then train them to be good leaders. But if they lack that quality, if they lack compassion, if they lack empathy, they can never be high quality leaders. Second, they must know their jobs. If they know their business, they'll earn the respect of their teams. Both respect and loyalty must be earned by the leader. These gifts are never bestowed. You don't wake up one morning and bestow loyalty, trust, respect on your leader. They have to earn it. And this is what a lot of managers fail to understand. They only look downward. You owe me your loyalty. You owe me respect. The fact is that whole dynamic has to be reversed, and it needs to be understood in reverse. It's your job as a high quality leader to earn the trust, faith, confidence, and respect of your team. If you fail to do that, it's your failure. There's kind of an equation here, and it's another aide memoir, and it going back to the 2 C's. Caring plus competency equals trust. Now, if you have the trust of your team, once again, they will not let you fail. And trust cannot be bought, it cannot be coerced, but only won. It can only be earned by those that are the most deserving. There are none of us who are perfect, only those that strive to be better than the sum of their parts. And these few are the best of us. These are our best leaders. Back to you.
There you go. There you go. I really think, and I'm glad that we had this discussion because, when I looked at this article, I found something missing, and to have the adaptive leader taking all of that we've just discussed, but then adding in equals trust. To have a leader that an individual can trust, I think makes all the difference in mental job satisfaction. It makes a difference in every area of our lives, not just our careers and in our faith life. We have to trust our leaders, and we each need to be that trust. So jump in and say something there, but that's fine. So Robert, any passing comments as we wind down minutes? And you're a wealth of information. Other than caring plus competency equals trust, words of wisdom do you have for the viewers?
In terms of aspirational goals, I think all of us aspire to be, at a minimum, good leaders. Now, good leaders, I remember doing a presentation in Vienna, Austria last year, and a woman asked me for a definition of a good leader. And I said, you need look no farther than good mothers. What do all good mothers have in common? They're self-sacrificing. They put their team first, in this case, their families first. They nurture people. They correct people when they need correction. It struck me while I was in the middle of the presentation that mothers actually were some of the finest leaders any one of us could hope to have. And if you were fortunate enough to have a good mother, then you already know what a good leader is. And we should all aspire to that.
There you go. A leader. What a great picture. Writing that down. All right, words to leave on: self-sacrifice, putting others first, and nurturing. This has been Litvak Leadership. And hey, if you have not liked Litvak Leadership on Facebook and YouTube, let me encourage you to go over there, because you're probably there now. Subscribe. Continue to get notified about these videos. We're building a movement here. Life is used for years and years. We're going to talk about that another day. But come on back next week. We're going to have another guest from another leadership. That's all now. We're going to have a great day. Robert, thank you again so much. Great.
Thank you for having me on, Joe.